Good afternoon, Internet people. It's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, time for our weekly breakdown of everything that happened on Sunday and maybe a theological discussion. If you got any good ones, let me know. The chat is open. Would love to hear from any of you. I can certainly fill a half hour of recap and discussion. So, on Sunday, these are my sermon notes. Interestingly, I only got to preach half of it, not quite half of it, because with the multicultural Super Sunday service, we tag teamed the sermon between Ali and myself. And of course, Eileen, again, is the rock star of translating it all. Yeah, I'd love to talk about the sermon today. Love to talk about the baptisms and just what goes into making a Super Sunday happen. So we'll definitely talk about that and the vision for how you do one church with different languages. So we'll talk about that a little bit today as well. It is a rainy fall November day. It's great to be in Colorado even on rainy days. It's a quiet week here at the office. We have people on vacation. We have people who are homesick, or their kids are homesick or whatever. So there's only a couple of us here in the office today, and that's actually nice and quiet and okay. So let's see. Yeah, let's talk about multicultural vision, because when we started looking into a Latino partnership, it really comes from the fact that Longmont as a city is anywhere between 25 and 30% Hispanic, Latino. And we felt like if our church doesn't reflect that, then we're not very good at being a church for the city of Longmont. But what we didn't want was like a Spanish-speaking ministry to rent space with us. That's been commonplace in a lot of churches that have buildings, is they find a Spanish-speaking ministry that exists unto itself, that's its own organization, but then they rent some space, and then they kind of do some things that connect, but they're not really the same. And we had a relationship with the Free Church in Littleton. I don't know if it's Centennial now or if it's still considered a Littleton address. But there's a Free Church down there called Bethany Free Church, and we have a good relationship with them. I'm really good friends with the pastor who was there for about 25 years, as well as his successor. So we have a good relationship with them, but they have a Spanish-speaking Free Church that meets there, that they partner with. But again, it's its own church entity. And that Spanish-speaking church has a lot of people up here in northern Colorado that go all the way down to Littleton to be a part of that. So there was a season where we opened up our doors to them and we had them join us for a couple things, but they were always their own church. And every time we tried to partner with them to do things under the Grace banner, there was kind of a, I don't want to say resistance, but it just was slow to develop. And they kind of wanted, the leadership of that church really wanted to keep things in-house down there in Littleton. So when Ali, and actually it was Oscar and Debbie Vantas, approached us 2-3 years ago saying, we actually would like to be Grace Church. We don't want to have our own church organization. We want to have your elders be our elders. We want your processes to be our processes. Understanding there's going to be cultural differences that we need to accommodate. But the goal was, we're one church. We just happen to have a Spanish-speaking service. So that's what we are. And that was always the goal. And that was very exciting. And that's still the vision. Because we want to represent what our city looks like. And if we're white only, well, that's not the church in the kingdom of God. That just doesn't play. That's not the vision that Jesus had for his church. It's not the vision that the New Testament has for the church. So we definitely need to be multicultural if we're going to be a biblically modeled New Testament church. And I bring this up because every time we do one of these multicultural Super Sundays, we get the anonymous comment cards, which, okay, rule number one, if you send in a comment card and you don't put your name on it, I don't see it. It goes straight into the circular file. We don't, if you don't have the backbone to put your name on it, I'm not going to care. I'm not going to read it, and I can't help you anyway. So all that is just a drive-by or a complaint in a complaint box. That doesn't help the church. So 99 times out of 100, 999 times out of 1,000, I'm not seeing that. But I do like, and I have asked in the past, to see the comment cards from these types of services, because I'm curious what people's predilections are or biases might be when they come into something as unique as what we're trying to do. And sure enough, we had a couple more this week. They weren't racially charged, but they were certainly, and there was two, and they were both basically negative. I don't like this. If you do it again, we're going to find another church. Like, okay, we're going to do it again. This is who we are. But at the same time, I don't mind some legitimate, helpful feedback. I don't want to say constructive criticism, because criticism to me is always tearing down, but feedback is good. And so Ali and I spent some time this morning just talking through what we felt like needed to be better next time we do this, because it didn't flow as nicely as previous times we'd done this. And I wanted to just talk about that a little bit today. But we're always trying to make these things better, figure out some strategies. We talked about in 2022, there's going to be 4 months with 5 Sundays, just like there always is. And what we're going to do in 22 is do a different focus each of those 4. We'll still do the Super Sunday combined congregation, but one of them, like, we're going to have an opportunity to go through all of the missions, people around the globe, to really get the full multicultural experience, not just Latino and English, but also give a chance to have somebody get up and read a passage in Swedish, or get somebody to call in or send us a video from one of the countries that we have global workers working in, to have somebody in the church they attend be a part of what we're doing. So we really can bring in the full every tribe, tongue, nation, language idea into play in some of those weeks. And so if some of you are like, well, that makes me feel uncomfortable, or I can't really follow it when it's not in my language. It's like people are like, I don't like movies if they're subtitled. It's like, okay, but you're missing out on some of the greatest movies ever made. But if you're not willing to get over yourself enough to do that, you're the one missing out, I guess is my point. At the same time, I did feel on Sunday, and you might have felt this as well, that the sermon didn't quite land. And again, Ali and I have talked about this, so I'm not going to say anything that we haven't already discussed. But I think he and I, when we were prepping this last week, what we did is we knew it was going to be a really long passage. And we even thought about not doing Luke, but doing a topic that would be more, the unity of the church or something like that. But with the clock ticking towards the end of the year and needing to really wanting to really get Luke done by the end of the year, I thought, no, we need to do this. And what's next is this really long section. And so we sketched it out. You have if you had the outline, you saw the trial with Pilate, the trial with Herod, the second trial with Pilate, and then Barabbas. Those are kind of the 4 pieces to the text. And so the idea was Ali would do the Pilates, and I would do the Herod and Barabbas. But then for the intro, I opted to do kind of the history of Pilate, to kind of set the stage historically for this passage. But what ended up happening, and we actually knew what the other one was going to say. We had sketched it out. I didn't know exactly what it was going to say, but we had our assignments for this, and we'd agreed on them. But then during the actual service on Sunday, I was sitting there while he was preaching in the first service, and I thought, I'm not sure either one of us is really preaching the point of this passage. I think we both came at it from such different perspectives that the parts he did were the parts where I would have fleshed out the main theme of Luke 23. But I handed them off to him. And the parts I did, I think, were the parts he would have fleshed out the main theme of Luke 23. So instead of either one of us really locking into Luke's point, I did history and he did application, and the point just didn't seem to show up at all. At least until Barabbas. I think we were able to wind it down okay, but that's learning. That's a learning curve. I know it's tough sometimes to listen to a sermon that's being translated. It's tough to preach a sermon that's being translated. So I can appreciate people who feel like, okay, I'm used to a particular pace and style of preaching, and I don't get it at these, bilingual services. And I totally appreciate that. I can understand that. But at the same time, it's kind of a fun adventure. And if you come with the right attitude, it can be a really good time. And I know most of you do. And I got great feedback. People, like, I'm being far more critical of the preaching maybe than anyone else. But again, Ali as well, we want to get better. And so we reviewed it all. And so I asked him, I said, so Ali, if we were to do this all again, what is Luke 23 about? What is the one word that we should have honed in on this passage? Instead of doing all the historical background or doing all the application stuff that he did, like, what should we have focused in on in a sentence or less? And we both agreed it's this concept of God's justice and God's grace, because Pilate and Herod, as I mentioned in the message, were, they were clowns. They had no business pretending they had an authority here over Jesus at all. And if you go all the way back to Gethsemane, where Jesus knew this is the Father's will, the Father's the one who he's obeying, the Father's the one who has the authority, who is saying you're going to go to the cross. So whatever Pilate and Herod did didn't matter to Jesus at all. But I think Barabbas is the pivot point of this whole section. And I think I spent way too much time talking about Roman history and Herod history. I love that stuff. And if I were preaching the whole of the sermon, I think there might have been time for that. But the way it worked, I don't know if that was really worth my time to do in the limited time I had. So, you live and you learn. And maybe you guys learned something about Sejanus or Herodias or something maybe that was new to you and you found interesting. So the Holy Spirit, of course, is going to do whatever he's going to do with it. And just because I'm walking you through my recap and evaluation process, I don't mean to undermine what the Spirit did through that sermon for you on Sunday. So I don't want to take away from that, because obviously he can get his words out through a donkey. He doesn't even need me. So, but from my perspective, that's kind of how it felt. Like, of the times that we've done this one felt the most disjointed to me up there. And I would, Ali was going on his applications about listening to pastors and having healthier marriages. And I'm just kind of sitting there like, I got to bring this back to Herod, and I'm not sure how to do that. And then I'd get up and I would be doing my thing, and he was sitting there listening. He's like, oh, that's pretty cool, the family drama of the Herods, but how in the world do I get this back to what he was talking about? So we did work together, but it just didn't land. But that's okay. We still got through the text, and I think the Spirit was definitely working. As you can see, if you were there, second service, first service was great as well, to finish with a baptism, to see that family again was great. But then the second service, to have that kind of altar call invitation and have somebody respond. And then we had the great baptisms that we had there as well. Yeah, it was a fun week. If you were here, it was a fun week. If that's not your thing, there's an element where I can understand that. There's also an element where I'm thinking, but this is what we need to get to, and we need to get better at it, and we will. So thank you for your participation and support in all of that. Now, you might be thinking, well, Jeff, if you could have done the parts Ali did, what would you have said? And that's what I want to talk about today. So this idea of justice, I wanted to do the background on Pilate, because I think we need to understand contextually, he really didn't care. It wasn't that he was overwhelmed. There was a part of him, he was more worried about his own neck because of the way Tiberius was taking out all of Sejanus's friends, that Pilate was like, if I get on Tiberius's radar, I'm in a lot of trouble. And so all he wanted to do was keep everything managed. Everything just needed to be calm, cool, and collected. But at the same time, he did have a sense of justice. And when he looked at Jesus, he's trying to tell the crowds, guys, this is dumb. He hasn't done anything. You're accusing him of this stuff. You have no evidence. There's no proof. And I interviewed him, and nope, he's not a criminal. But he was so worried about protecting his own stuff that when he found out that Jesus was from Galilee or had spent time in Galilee, he's like, oh, that's Herod's job. That's not my job. So, Herod, you're in town. Take a look at this. So we don't know how far away Pilate's office in Jerusalem was, because Pilate's main, more historical stuff you may or may not care about. Pilate wasn't in Jerusalem very often either. Herod lived up in where he governed, and Pilate had a whole thing built for him out in Caesarea. Maritima is what it's called now, or maybe it was what it was called then. But anyway, he had a whole palace up there, and it was on the coast, kind of the north coast, up by Tyre and Sidon, and you can still go there. There's the ruins of his palace and the hippodrome and all this cool stuff up there. And I think he and Herod had probably more interactions in Caesarea than they did in Jerusalem. But because of the feast and because of whatever business they had, they happened to both be there. So we don't know how far Jesus had to walk to go from one to the other, but it wasn't much. They were in town together. It all happened in one evening, one night. Or actually, it said when day came in Luke, so I guess one morning. So he's doing this back and forth. And I think from Jesus' perspective, I mean, he's already been beaten up. He's going to get tortured even more. And then he's got to stand in front of these yahoos who kind of act like they're in control. And I think Jesus' silence says so much about how much he really thought of these guys. And again, we already know that Herod had killed John, and that was very upsetting to Jesus. And he even called Herod a fox at one point. You go tell that old fox he can come get me whenever he wants. So Jesus was almost dismissive, and I think that's right. So I probably would have dug into more of the actual trial and conversations and the perspective that Jesus must have had on these two guys trying to sit in judgment over him, as well as the crowds, kind of the psychology of crowdthink, how the chief priests and elders were able to stir up the people. And we don't know how many people were there crying for this, but enough that Pilate had to kind of like go against his instincts to keep the rebellion down. Isn't it funny? I probably would have pointed this out. The charge they brought to Pilate was he is sparking an insurrection. He's telling people not to pay taxes to Caesar, which of course is the opposite of what he said. But he's stirring up the people against Rome. That was so that they could get Pilate interested in what was going on. And what's hilarious to me, well, not hilarious, but I guess ironic, is that in the end, Pilate agreed to put Jesus to death because the people were about to rebel. And his whole thing was, I don't want a rebellion because then I get on Tiberius's radar. So just everybody, calm down. And what's funny is the charge was that Jesus was sparking all of this. And in the end, he agreed to put Jesus to death because the people were sparking it and he wanted to calm them down. So the whole thing is just like the accusations are exactly what they're doing. And Jesus, through all of it, is he's not doing anything. He's not saying anything. He's not stirring anything up. And Ali referenced John's version of this where Jesus and Pilate have more of a conversation. And Jesus basically says, I am not here to raise up a military coup against Rome. My kingdom is wholly different than that. Way more important, way more internal. And I think Ali did a good job of talking about that the kingdom is internal change, not trying to throw down Rome through military means, which of course is what people wanted the Messiah to do. And Jesus is like, no, that's not what I'm doing. And nobody got it because, as Ali said as well, they weren't listening. And so, yeah, there's so much in here, but I really think that the point of all of these trials in Luke's version is to get us to Barabbas, because after all of that, Barabbas is the guy who gets released in that whole like mockery of justice, that the guy who was in jail for starting an insurrection and murder got to go free because the people were starting an insurrection because he wouldn't kill Jesus. Pilate wouldn't kill Jesus. So in order to stop the falsely accused insurrection, he had to agree with the people who were causing the insurrection and release the guy who had been arrested for starting an insurrection. So Pilate did everything wrong. He did everything upside down. And again, he didn't really care. Actually, there's more history after that between Pilate and the Jewish people. And eventually he is called back to Rome after Tiberius dies and Caligula takes over. And if you've heard the name Caligula, you know kind of his stuff that went down. Not a good guy at all. And you know who one of Caligula's good friends was? Herod. Both Herod Antipas and Herod Agrippa the First, who shows up in the book of Acts. They were tight with Caligula. And so Pilate, he was out of time. And actually, history doesn't really tell us what happened to Pilate after he left to go back to Rome. If he was put to death for being a bad governor or if he was sent into exile, there's different legends and stories. But Pilate's a real interesting guy and worth looking into. But I think Barabbas is an interesting guy. I wish there was more on him. Barabbas is a Hebrew name that means son of the father, Bar Abbas. And I don't know if there's anything to that, but that always jumps out at me when I read his story. And that idea of substitutionary atonement, that is a major concept of the theology of salvation, that Jesus atoned for us by taking our place. And of course, Barabbas is the literal person who was substitutionarily atoned for. Love that piece of the story. And what I put in here in my notes, which I didn't have time to get to, is this concept of justice versus mercy. And in our culture, everybody wants the grace and mercy. No one wants the justice. So the doctrine of substitutionary atonement has actually lost a lot of ground in this generation because they don't want God to be wrathful against sin. They don't want him to be just. They just want him to be nice and loving. And so I wrote down here, without the supreme sacrifice for our sins, God's grace means nothing. Barabbas was going to die until Jesus died instead. So the idea that Jesus doesn't, that sin doesn't have to be punished because God's just nice, takes away the whole point of the cross. And it means that the mercy that a Barabbas got, or that we get, is basically not mercy at all. It's just nothing gets dealt with, no justice gets poured out, and God's holiness then is not holy. And so what do we gain from that? The answer is virtually nothing, because God's not God, and forgiveness doesn't mean anything, and mercy doesn't mean. There has to be justice. There has to be wrath against sin, and that's the story of the cross. And that's the story of Barabbas, and that's the story of us. And Pilate and Herod did nothing to accomplish any of that. It was simply God orchestrating all the events. And I think that's one of the takeaways I've had in all of these kind of Passion Week stories here in Luke, has been just how much Jesus is in control of everything. Like when they arrest him in the garden, and he he goes almost as far as to say, like, you should be standing there and you should be standing there. And Judas, here, it's your turn now. Come do your thing. Peter, put the sword away. We're not doing it this way. Okay, let's go. And then he goes to Pilate, and everything's just happening by the director's intent. And these people are just taking their turn on the stage, and then they do their part, and then they go away. But it's all God's plan. It's all God's will. And so is grace. So is mercy. And it wouldn't be available without all of those other pieces. And that's what I tried to say, especially at the end of the second service, is, thank the Lord. Thank God for Pilate. Thank God for Herod. If they didn't play their parts, we wouldn't be on the receiving end like Barabbas. We got the grounds people outside my window, like right outside my window with the leaf blowers. So if you can hear that, sorry. And if you can't, well, now you can imagine it. So anyway, I feel like I'm preaching the sermon again, but I just love all this stuff. And this coming Sunday, we're in the rest of Luke 23, and it's the crucifixion itself. So it's going to be a Good Friday this Sunday. Definitely focus on the cross and the gospel. And then we have communion this week as well. So definitely looking forward to that. I enjoyed the music. It was fun at the 8:30 service because we had a lot of the young kids with their families instead of having full children's ministry for this week. So having that energy and that age group with music that was a little bit louder and a little more energetic, it was really fun. It was the first time I can remember in a long time that the 8:30 congregation was more energized and clapping than the 10:15 congregation. So that was fun. Just kind of see our people get energized a little bit, and to have Javier and Jesus and Eileen in the band on drums and bass and guitar is always great. So I just love those services. They're fun. And I think if we come with the right attitude, even the things that are a little bit abnormal or difficult for us to follow can be fun. But if we come with kind of like, it has to be the way I want it, like, and you send that comment card, I'm not sure it's going to make a dent in me at all, because this is what we need to do. This is who we are. It's not like this is just like a throw off once every couple months. We're going to pretend that we have a Latino congregation here that we like. No, this is who we are. We are a unified church of different ethnicities, because that's the New Testament church. And if you've been coming here and you think that's a bridge too far, whether it's because of your politics or because of what you expect a service to be, I don't know if I can help you. This is what we're going to do, and this is who we're going to be. And I can show you about 10 different places in Scripture why that's okay and actually good. So, sorry, I'm a little combative because of some of those cards. But anyway, I know if you're watching this, you're probably all excited. And you're thinking, yeah, that's exactly what I love. And it was fun. Yeah, I got to know some new people, and that was fun. Or I got to see, again, Eileen being a rock star up there translating. And that's always worth it as well. The other thing I should mention, we worked this morning on the sermon series in 2022, where we're going to go now that we're going to be done with Luke, Lord willing. And we're going to start with an Old Testament series in January, February, then New Testament again, and then Old Testament, the New Testament. Now we can get back into that routine, because we've been in Luke for 2 years. So it's time to go into the Old Testament a little bit. So I'm going to keep a lid on that. I'll just let you have to guess what it'll be. We'll tell you eventually, but still working that out. But it's exciting to see it on my whiteboard, which is right over the camera. And be like, yeah, it's going to be fun to do those books. So it is 1:27. Got about 3 minutes left to fill time. Nobody's commented, but I'm going to wave at you just in case. I think as we enter November, it's going to be a great holiday season as we head towards finishing Luke, Easter in November, followed by Thanksgiving in November, followed by some Advent things leading up to Christmas. Yes, there will be an outer space illustration on Christmas Eve. Yes, I know what it's going to be. No, I'm not going to tell you. What was funny was a couple Christmas Eves ago, we had a family come dressed in like outer space clothes, like a shirt that had like Saturn and Jupiter and stuff on it. And I'm like, did you wear that for Christmas, or did you wear that for a Christmas Eve service because you know we're going there? And the mom and the kids were just like, oh, we can't wait for more outer space tonight. So I like that I've established a little bit of a trajectory and fun. And if you're new here, you might not know this tradition, but I'm an outer space geek. I'm a total outer space nerd. And for some reason, Christmas, maybe because of the Star of Bethlehem, it always gets me thinking about outer space. And so that's a big thing that we do. In fact, we were out on our driveway handing out candy on Sunday night, and a guy came up with his kids, and he was in a full suit, like coat, pants, tie, shirt, the whole bit. And it was all planets all over his whole suit, and the pants too. And I'm like, hey man, where did you get that? Because I'm thinking, I got to get one of them for Christmas Eve. And he just laughed, thinking I was complimenting him. And I'm like, no, I really want to know where you got that, because I want it. But it was a weird conversation. Then his kids were trying to figure out what candy they wanted. So it didn't really go anywhere. But it got me thinking again, Christmas is coming, and it's coming right quick. So just a couple weeks from now. So if you are having a good week, I hope you continue to have a good week. If you've had a rough week so far, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you for watching. Those of you who are watching live, you're awesome. Those of you who are watching later, you are awesome. Those of you who don't watch this at all, You're also made in the image of God and are awesome, but someone else will have to tell you because you didn't hear it from me. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Adios, Ali. And we will catch you next time. See ya.